You're listening to Linked AM. Tell your story on Linked Live and get noticed. You're listening to Karl Wolfenden on the Business Class Show and is not always affiliated with the guests and the topics discussed. Any financial statements are the opinions of the individual, and you should seek professional advice before making any decisions. Upgrade your listening to Business Class, the show that puts you in the big leather comfy seats. So sit back and enjoy our take on the trending business issues of the week.
Howdy, folks. Here he is, the Texas Brit, the guy with the stiff upper lip, filling his 10-gallon hat and his cowboy boots, Karl Wolfenden.
Good morning, and welcome to Linked AM here on Business Class News. And we've been talking about all the different elements of a business. We had the other day Inc. File on, who, of course, create different types of entities. And we touched on a subject that really made me want to know a little bit more about this. And it was that a large amount of small businesses or startups, doesn't mean to say they're small, startups actually fail. And it's like, there's lots of perspectives and lots of topics on that. But I actually had a friend that, put me onto a book that's coming out in the next couple of months. And they got me a sneak preview of it. And I thought I'd love to interview the author of this book because it really had a different perspective of why businesses can actually succeed, but you need a little bit of extra. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But the book is called The Unstoppable Startup. As I say, when it gets released, I'll put out a link. And of course, we've got Uri Adoni, who is the author of the book, with me today. So Uri, thank you. And you're in Israel, and you're joining me from Israel, aren't you?
Yeah, correct. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Cross pond, whatever. As I just said in my intro there, that the statistics of startups, is quite staggering when you see how many can actually fail. But then when I started doing some research, the only country other than China and the US that have got more companies in the NASDAQ is Israel. So what makes Israel such a great ecosystem to really survive? I mean, you've got this subheadline on the book that says "Mastering Israel's Secret Rules of Chutzpah." So chutzpah, yeah. I mean, the if you translate that, it's from what I understand is audacity. You have the audacity to say something. Is that the right translation? What does it mean?
Yeah, so it's chutzpah means kind of chutzpah has I would say a positive angle and a negative one. So the negative one, if you're being arrogant or things like that. So we're not on that side of the chutzpah, right. But on the positive side, it's this audacity, kind of go-to approach, kind of I would say above all, it's a mindset that enables you to be confident enough to challenge all sorts of existing solutions or status quo and say, I can actually build something better than, EMC, Microsoft, Google, whoever. And because I think I know where the market is going, and I think I can build a technology that will meet the market needs in a better way. So, we can go deeper into some of these rules of chutzpah, but I would say the main thing is kind of a audacity mindset, so to speak. And this is part, and one of the reasons I kind of wrote this book was because this is kind of, if I have to narrow it down to, what makes Israel different, I would say it's the kind of this entrepreneurial culture and how we treat failure and how we treat creativity and how obviously we have this kind of chutzpah mindset. Obviously, the whole ecosystem support. So you need the entrepreneurs, you need the talent, you need the funding, you need the academia, you need the government support, you need the multinationals. But you have these things in other ecosystems as well. And when I was kind of thinking about it, it actually was. It's a funny story. I was actually in an international conference, and I was talking about the Israeli ecosystem and some of the statistics you mentioned in NASDAQ. And Israel has the highest density of startups per capita and highest venture capital per capita, and nice numbers. And at the end of the talk, this guy kind of raised his hand. We had some Q&As, and he said, how can I tweet your talk? And I said, what do you mean? I said, I have 280 characters. What's the tweet? And I was like, that's a good question. I was thinking about it for a minute. And then, I told him, you should tweet, it's all about chutzpah. This is kind of, if I have to really kind of pinpoint it, I would put it on that. So that kind of, in a way, drove me to a journey, so to speak. And I started talking to all sorts of entrepreneurs. And it was really interesting to find out that behind any successful startup, you have this chutzpah element within the entrepreneur, and whether they are aware of it or whether or not. By the way, a lot of non-Israeli entrepreneurs also have chutzpah, but they don't necessarily know how to define it. And so basically, the book is about these stories from successful entrepreneurs, whether it's very large companies that had exits and IPOs in NASDAQ or were sold to $1 billion plus, and more modest exits of tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. But they all have one, I would say, common denominator, which is kind of unstoppable entrepreneur behind them, which I thought was really interesting.
Absolutely, and I think as I'm listening to you and then recalling what I read in the book, so the idea of an entrepreneur, okay, is somebody that's passionate and has the desire and the knowledge to go out into the marketplace. But I've known many people that are passionate and can go out in the marketplace but they don't have that strength. They don't have the audacity. And I apologize. It looks like at the beginning of the interview, I said chutzpah, but it's chutzpah.
Yeah, exactly.
So there you go. So I want to make sure that the readers and the listeners and the viewers are getting this, because at the end of the day, I want to make sure I pronounce it correctly. But I think that is a missing ingredient. And as I read the book, you talked about the CEO Ways, for example, you interviewed, and you had the talk with, and they exited, wasn't it Google?
Google bought them for over $1 billion.
Over $1 billion. But the way that you tell that story is inspiring to somebody like me, who is a kind of an entrepreneur. I dabble in many different types of businesses, etc. But it was like, oh my goodness, I can draw some parallels with my life, but there's certain things I completely thought, I got to try that. And you've got like 3 easily understandable topics, don't you? That really you cover in the book as such. And do you want to go through those? I mean, it's like implementing the rules of chutzpah. Is one, and then developing an early stage investment vehicle. Explain more about that, because those were the 3 things that I really sort of grasped.
So I think coming back to what you just said about what differentiates between different entrepreneurs, and you mentioned passion, which is, I think, a key ingredient, because without that you cannot go through this crazy roller coaster called a startup. So you definitely need a passion, and the passion is not just for it's not passion for an exit or passion for money. That wouldn't work. You need passion for the business, for this thing that you want to change, it's like frustrates you that the world doesn't see what you see, and you are, you have a conviction that this is how it should work. So the passion is very important. I think this maybe missing element, or this extra element that is needed for entrepreneurs, is these. Again, it's some of these rules that I talked about, but it's this mindset. And I think that what's interesting about it, it's not just about, unlike charisma, which you are either born with it or not. You cannot teach somebody to be charismatic. You either have it or not. Chutzpah you can actually teach, because or you can, guide somebody. So because it's a mindset, it's something that you can actually practice. And so some of the rules, I mentioned the mindset, which is probably the most important thing, is how to challenge reality. But this mindset also drives other kind of things that you should think of. For example, when you start a startup, I can tell you as a venture capitalist, when I look at a startup, you want to make sure that this startup has the potential to be a category leader. Obviously, they don't all become category leaders, but and you can do it two ways: either by becoming a leader of an existing category, or you're inventing a whole new category, and then you're the one who leads it because you invented it. Twitter is a great example, and others. Or Waze, for that matter, they invented a category of social navigation systems. So you are the category. So you may have some competitors later, but it's definitely one way to look at dominating the market. So this is another thing that you should be aware of. How do you dominate the market? And when you look at the market, I usually like to look at the world and not on a local level. Because you have countries that have these copycats, so they see one idea in one country and they bring it over. Yeah, you may be a local, leader, but that's less interesting for venture capital and for the market as a whole, the NASDAQ, etc. So definitely leading or dominating the market category is another element. Another kind of rule, so to speak, is the fact that any entrepreneur has this kind of ability, in a way, to foresee the future. So they don't have like some mysterious
crystal
ball or
ball.
anything.
Yes.
Crystal ball, yeah, exactly. But they need, if you look at good entrepreneurs, they always have this hypothesis of where the market is going. Whether it's in the business, whether it's the consumers, it doesn't matter. Cyber, healthcare, agri-tech, food tech is now very big, where the food industry is going. So they have this vision and kind of prediction, so to speak, or hypothesis where the market is going and where it will be in 3, 4, 5 years' time. And then you need to now develop this thing that the world will need in a few years' time, but you need to it's like, a missile that hits a target and they're both moving all the time, and eventually they need to hit one another. So definitely foreseeing the future and have some kind of a strong hypothesis to where the market is going, where the world is going, is very important. And on that aspect, you don't necessarily have to only look forward. Sometimes you can say, today the market needs it and there's no good enough solution for it. So definitely it's looking at what exists today and where the world is going. What exists today, sometimes you might find competitors that are already, kind of highlighted this need or this issue. And then there's other aspects which are kind of, I would say, operational sometimes, but whether it's the fact that sometimes you need to bend the rules within the law, obviously, but you don't always have to go by the book, and this is something that Israel is kind of known for, I guess, again, for better or worse. And there's the story about Space IL in the book, which is
I read that one.
Group of
yeah.
So they had this. Google had this competition about sending a spaceship to the moon without people in it, but and they did this competition, and part of the rules with you need to kind of move on the move for 500 meters, and all the other teams kind of started planning a rover that will actually travel or kind of you have a ride on the moon with this rover and for 500 meters, 500 feet, or more or less, 500 yards. So, and the Israeli team thought that having this rover is really a big hurdle, because it it's big and you need more fuel, and then the whole spaceship needs to be much larger. And they thought, nobody said it needs to travel on the moon. Let's ask Google if we can jump 500 and in the moon the gravity is not that good, so it can actually work well. And Google said, you know what, we checked, fine, that's fine with us. So they actually had the smallest aircraft or spaceship, so to speak, because they kind of looked at the rules and said, all right, there's kind of a new thing to look at here. So it's just a nice example of how you can kind of adjust yourself within the boundaries, but not follow exactly what the written word is saying. And the last thing to mention is kind of what I talk about, kind of the show don't tell, which is usually very powerful with startups, because you want to actually, especially when you talk about technologies, and sometimes it's kind of science fiction almost, and when you show, I looked just a while ago, I met this startup that prints hamburgers in 3D printers. Yeah, really cool technology with this very interesting ingredient, and you can actually say whether you want it well done, whether you want it burned, and it can print basically fish, pasta. It's quite incredible.
Oh my goodness!
But when I heard about it, I said, I was very skeptical. I went to the lab and saw this 3D printer. They put the thing in, and they started printing this hamburger, and I don't know, 3.5 minutes later, there was a hamburger there. And with the smell of hamburger, it was crazy. So, when you see things that are actually working, you don't have to convince anybody more than that, because you can actually demonstrate it. And there's a lot of examples of, cybersecurity companies that are just, they just demonstrate how vulnerable you are. And you say, you sit with the CIO, with the chief security, with the CISO, with the chief security officer, and you say, there's, I don't know, of a healthcare, for example, a provider, and say, by the way, I have this file here with 1.5 million people with all their details, because it's not safe enough. And again, you're not doing anything illegal, but you say, I suggest that you have a better cybersecurity system, and then obviously if you have the system, it's a good way of selling it. So I think show don't tell is very important, and especially when it comes to kind of really unique and innovative technologies.
Well, I think the thing that I've always, because I've had hundreds and hundreds of conversations with experts like yourself and people that have been experienced. I mean, you got 20 years experience in the venture capitalist area. So what I've learned is there's so many ideas out there that maybe there's some similar to others, etc. And it's like, what made that particular one succeed and the one that looked really similar didn't? It's because of the way they approach it, and they can show and not tell. I mean, that's a big part of this.
Yeah. And I think, I don't think there's a formula that, because then everybody would follow it. But I think that definitely you need a few ingredients that makes a successful startup. I would say, on the other side, the startups that don't succeed, from my experience, are usually the ones who didn't listen careful enough to what the market was telling them. And sometimes you need to be you have this musical ear to very minor details. Sometimes you think they're minor, but if, you sit with a potential customer and he tells you something and you ignore it, and then you build a whole, a product that doesn't really meet the need, then, it's a lot to do with that, because you want the market to embrace you. And you have to be flexible. You need to be, creative. You have to improvise sometimes, and mainly you need to listen very careful to what the market is saying. And the market is keep evolving and changing. So you have all the time. You have to keep listening to what the market is saying. And so, I think that definitely kind of a very sensitive approach to what the market is telling you, and then when you can show something, you can get a feedback much better than you just have some kind of a theory about it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that I've been involved in, I've been involved in a lot of SaaS, platforms, etc.
Right.
And one thing I learned very quickly was I have to become that salesman that is literally a listener. And I remember back in my early days of learning how to become a sales guy, type of thing, of that you have to listen very carefully. And it should be the 80-20 rule. The prospect needs to be talking, and we really just fill in the 20% bit. But at the end of the day, you got to listen to what the consumer's looking for, and really absorb, because things change so quickly, especially in the tech space. I mean, I sometimes I can't understand. You're working out on this idea, and then all of a sudden things change, and you're trying to develop something, and it changes on the fly, and you've got to be nimble and flexible, don't you?
Exactly. Very, very true. By the way, it's not by mistake that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So I think that should be the ratio.
There you go. Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. True. I mean, I mean, in terms of, because unfortunately we're coming up to the end of the segment, and I'm going to bring you back on because you touched on cybersecurity side of things, and I as you know, we talked off mic about, we just launched business class security. It's a very big topic for me. Even that's with reading your book, and then actually I'm actually going to be taking my Security Plus certificate, because I want to actually be able to say I know what I'm talking about. But it's one of those things that we've got to really look at, all that sort of those ingredients, as you say, and the ingredients. I must say this is a great cookbook then, because it's got all the ingredients in here for that. So when it's out, I'm talking to the listeners and the readers out there and the viewers. You've got to get hold of a copy of this. Before I let you go, I want you to sort of, is there one thing that you think that an entrepreneur can learn from this, other than chutzpah, that they're going to take away from your book? What would you say it is?
I talk a little bit about the mission command mindset there, which is, it's interesting because, again, if I'm talking about Israel and, people are familiar with the Israeli army. And sometimes when I meet people, they think army is just about following orders. And actually, in the Israeli army, that's not the most important thing. And the main value in the IDF is to complete the mission. This is it. And even though it's an army, you can improvise, you can change the plan, you can do whatever you want. Just make sure you complete the mission. And you're trained for that. So, I was a commander of a combat unit for many years, and this is how you've been trained. So when you go in the drill, everybody's doing all these things. They say, okay, you're out of ammunition now. You have that amount of wounded. Your helicopter is not going to come. You should, figure it out. But you must complete the mission. You don't want to think even to take to the radio and say, I haven't completed the mission. It's unheard of. It's not an option. And so I think when you take this kind of concept and you implement it into a startup, it's very powerful. And I think that it goes in a way together with this mindset of chutzpah that I was talking about. So I think if you truly believe and convicted in, and you're convinced in the mission that you have, make sure you complete it. Make sure that you're in a mission completion mode. And it's amazing how the mind enables you to overcome. It's just it's as simple, but it's probably the hardest thing to actually kind
mind
of change
over matter,
the mindset,
as they say. Yes.
And it's amazing because when you are in this completion mission mode, you will open the doors and you will not be afraid of failure because that's not an option, and you will meet the right people. It won't be easy. It never is. It never is. Startup. It's a hard journey. But in order to succeed, you must have this kind of mission completion kind of belief in this mission that you have, and that you will complete it. And this, when you adopt this into your mind, it's a very powerful thing to have. And I think that almost any good entrepreneur in any, large company that, was built started as a startup, you will find this kind of mission completion mindset within the entrepreneurs and the management and the leadership of the startup. So, I would say complete the mission. Just take that, and I'm happy.
Well, hey, Uri, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's been excellent.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
I mean, the book is a wealth of information, and the experience that you have, and then what you've captured from those experienced CEOs, etc., is great. So thanks again, and I'm sure I'm going to have you back on because we got to, and I'll try and make it a little bit earlier in the day for you so that it's not too late.
That's fine. I'm fine.
Well, that was Uri Adoni, of course, the author of The Unstoppable Startup, and of course, the Mastering Israel's Secret Rules of Chutzpah. I got it right this time, Chutzpah. As Uri just said, I mean, it's all about really looking at the right ingredients, having that sort of that passion, but also the mindset of saying, I'm going to complete this. It's a mindset of mission completed. And if you have that, then you're going to be successful. So please, when it's out, I'm going to put the link on. It's a must read, and I'm so pleased I could have Uri on the show today. So as I always say to you all out there, go and have some fun, make some money, but be safe out there. Goodbye.